Hi, I'm Sandra Porter. Today, we're going to look at the interaction between a new protease drug that has been discussed by Pfizer, announced by Pfizer, that can treat, it has had really good success with treating SARS-CoV-2. It binds to the SARS-CoV-2 main protease. And we're going to look at how that works. So I'm going to select the inhibitor, and I'm going to give it a name. I'm going to save selection, and I'm going to call it inhibitor. This is going to allow me to select it again more easily. All right, now what I'd like to do is I'd like to be able to select amino acids that interact with this inhibitor. So to do this, I'm going to select by distance. I open the select menu. I choose by distance. Okay. In the first set, it says I could just keep what I've selected because I've already selected the inhibitor, or now because I've given it a name, I could choose inhibitor. And in the second set, I'm just going to say non-selected. Or if I wanted to be more precise, I could pick, my protein chain. So this is protein chain A. And I'll say display. And get rid of my menu. You can see that the part of the structure that surrounds the inhibitor has been highlighted. Those amino acids have been selected. And I'm going to save that selection, just like I did with the inhibitor. So I say save selection. I'm going to call this binding site. And that'll make it easier for me to select the binding site in later operations. Okay, so now what I want to do is I'm going to look at the amino acids that are involved in this interaction. To do that, I open the analysis menu and I click sequences and annotations. I can get rid of that for a moment. And you'll see here that I've got a window that shows me kind of a schematic of the proteins that are in the structure and the inhibitor, but I really want to see the sequence. So I'm going to click details, and I can scroll through this and see which amino acids in the sequence are highlighted, because these are ones that are part of the binding site. I can see that there is a histidine here, and it's his41. Kind of have to hold my cursor over it a little slowly to get that. I can see I've got methionine 49, tyrosine 54, and I can scroll through and find other amino acids. And I could take capture a screen image of this to have in my notes, which would be great. And I'm going to write down or somehow record all the names of all these amino acids and their position numbers. Okay, because I want to know everything that is within the binding site and could be interacting. Okay, now what I want to do, once I've got all that done, is I want to annotate the inhibitor binding site. So what I'm going to do for that, so I'm going to go back to here, my structure window, can make that a bit smaller. Make this a little bit larger so it's easier to see. Okay, so what I want to do now is I want to look at, I'm going to make the amino acids in the binding site kind of larger. So I'm going to pick proteins, style, sphere. Okay, so you can kind of see where they are there. And I'm going to change this to a different color just to make it easier for me to see. I'm going to make it a little bit of a darker color. I'll make it, sure, purple. Purple's nice. Okay, and now what I want to do is I'm going to clear the selection here. And I know from what I've read, I know which amino acids are part of the active site of this protease. I know that The active site is made up of histidine 41 and cysteine 145. So I'm going to select those two amino acids and look at those a little bit more closely. So first of all, I'll pick his 41, which is right here. So I just dragged my cursor across the H, and you can see how it highlighted the histidine in the structure. Now I scroll through the sequence and I'll find cysteine 145, which is here. Again, drag my cursor across and it highlights in the sequence and in the structure. And I'll make sure that I still have the histidine still highlighted. Okay, so I've highlighted histidine 41 and cysteine 145, and you can see where they are here as well. Okay, the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to color these two amino acids by atom so I can see which atoms are participating in the interactions. And I'm going to make these ball and stick so I can see them a little bit better. Okay. And now I'd like to know, I'm going to zoom in a bit. And as I look at these, I'm seeing something kind of interesting. In fact, I'm going to hide the rest of my binding site for a moment and select the inhibitor. Oops. Actually, through the selection, we'll select those again in the sequence. So histidine 41, cysteine 145, there we go. And then I will, maybe I'll save those as a selection too. We'll call those active site. There we go. Make it easier to select those again if I want them. And I'm going to select the inhibitor. I hold down the Alt key or the Option key. Oops, or the Command key, sorry. Now I've got these selected and I'm going to hide everything else just to make this easier to see. And move my menus around a little bit. Okay, and when I do this, I can see, so here's the histidine that's part of the active site. And here is cysteine 145, part of the active site. And what you can see here that's interesting is that there's a covalent bond between the sulfur on cysteine 145 and my inhibitor. Probably helps explain why it works so well. It doesn't move out of the way. It's really pretty well stuck there. Okay. Now what I'm going to do is also show the binding site again. So I'm going to go back to define sets. Now I can pick the active site, the binding site, and my inhibitor. I'm going to view all of these. And I'm going to change the way I portray this so I can see this a little bit better. I'll view all of these and I'm going to make the style, change the surface type, make this molecular surface. So you can kind of see how the inhibitor is positioned in the binding site. And it's also kind of nice sometimes actually to take this, and I'll take the inhibitor and we'll make the inhibitor, move the surface for the inhibitor and toggle the highlight. And then we can kind of see Go back, pick the binding site, apply the surface for the binding site. Here we go. So now you can see how the inhibitor is positioned within this binding pocket. And here is where the covalent bond is to cysteine, the sulfur in cysteine 145. And we can also clear the selection here and show the whole thing again. And I'm zooming out a bit. So now I can see kind of where this binding site is located, which part of the protein, it's sort of on the outside. And I can see that there is an equivalent binding site over here in the other chain, which is pretty much the same sequence and same site. Okay, so that shows us a little bit about the interaction. Now I'd like to know a little bit more about the interactions between the inhibitor and the binding site. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go back to my defined sets. I'm going to select the binding site, select the inhibitor. And what I can do here now is I'm going to open up the analysis menu and I'm going to pick interactions. And the key ones I'd like you to look at, or that we're going to look at, is we're going to look at hydrogen bonds and we're going to look at salt bridges. So I'm just going to delete everything else here. And I can just say selected, or I could just change this to and say binding site here and chemicals here. However I'd like to do it. And we'll just say 3D display interactions. Notice the colors here, that I've got a green for hydrogen bonds and blue for salt bridges. And if we zoom in, and take a look here. In fact, I think I can just say view selection. And I'm going to remove the surface here. What I can see is that there is a hydrogen bond between a hydrogen in histidine and this sulfur sulfhydryl group here. Okay, this is part of the buffer. And then there's a hydrogen bond here between my inhibitor. There's a nitrogen on the inhibitor right there. And it is binding to a histidine 164. And let's take a look at this histidine. We'll color this by atom so that we can see what elements are part of it. And we can see that, and I'll toggle the highlight. Okay, we can see that there's this hydrogen bond is forming between the nitrogen in the inhibitor and an oxygen in the backbone of histidine 164. And that's all for now.